Hi, everybody. Bill Doherty here from the Doherty Relationship Institute, offering some strategies for couples therapists and discernment counselors for working with couples and helping couples during this pandemic we're involved in now. I appreciated the questions and comments on the website from our therapists, our discernment counselors in particular, about areas you could use some help. And I'm going to be dealing with strategies for helping couples, regular couples, therapy couples, others who are not in high distress at the moment. That'll be the first part. Second part will be helping couples who are in a great relationship distress. And then the third part, helping couples on the brink. So that'll be the division here. I'm not going to be talking about how you do this with tele-mental health because I've never done that myself. So here we go, and I hope it's helpful to you. And again, I appreciate all the questions that came in. So for all couples, the first is to normalize the stress and strains that they're experiencing during this COVID-19 crisis. Normalize them as coming from anxiety, understandable anxiety, lack of structure in their everyday lives with people on top of each other, too much togetherness. So the classic normalize, because a lot of people maybe think that other couples are handling this fine and that there's something uniquely wrong with them. They're in a bunker together with an invisible enemy, this virus surrounding them. So the first is to normalize. We're all going through this. The second is to help them develop a routine of being together and apart, like work and family routines. We human beings, most of us function better with some predictability in our lives. And they're kind of, couples are sort of like newly retired couples, both people retired together at the same time. What are they going to do? My mother used to quote an old line about, I married you for better or worse, but not for lunch. And so developing ways that they can be around each other, be apart from each other, do their work or social media in different parts of the house and come together. So developing a predictable routine. And by the way, all of these are on a handout that will accompany this presentation. So don't feel like you have to take notes. A third one, and this is now we're getting into a bit or deeper territory here, and that is to normalize different coping strategies that spouses, partners have. There are more maximizers and more minimizers, and they tend to marry each other. And so the key there is to emphasize acceptance of one's own coping strategy, emotional coping strategy, acceptance of oneself and the other person, and to really encourage them to avoid polarizing around whose emotional coping style is better, and then of course criticizing the other's lifelong approach. You're always in denial about these things, or you're always making too big a deal of something. This, of course, it comes up in lots of ways in marriage and couple relationships. If we're worrying about an illness, for example, worrying about a child, frail, elderly, that some people cope by wanting to stay on top of information, processing their anxiety, thinking about the worst, what they might do. Others cope by tamping it down, saying we're just going to take it a day at a time, can't know what's going to happen, and emphasizing things will probably be okay. With the virus now, the 80-20 conversation. 80% of people have mild symptoms, 20 have serious, and then a subset within that group have really serious outcomes. And so the maximizers emphasize the 20%, the minimizers emphasize the 80%. The key is for people to accept each other's emotional coping styles, not criticize them, not tell the other person to change, a lifelong emotional coping approach. So this is a major one we can help people with. Them understanding how they polarize, and the antidote that is acceptance and not arguing about something that is really not that changeable. Now, what about when people are behaving in ways that that a spouse or partner thinks is not appropriate? Well, so now we're talking about behavior, not emotional coping style. So how can we help people give each other feedback, make requests of each other around behavior, particularly risky behaviors, that doesn't get them into you are in denial. And so one of the ways that I help people do this, and I try to practice it in my own life, is to ask for requests of behavior change without criticizing or attacking. So one strategy that can be helpful is to ask your spouse to shift something they're doing to that may be lower risk, to not go to a park where there are lots of people around, for example, or to wash their hands for 20 seconds when they come home. And to do that, if you're tend to be a little bit maybe more on the maximizer side, you're and more vigilant, and you're married to somebody who is less so, you can ask them to do it for you. You can do the classic I message, you know, I'm worried, I'm concerned about your health, my health. Could you do me the favor of washing your hands when you come in? Could you do me the favor of not going to that park? Spouses are much more likely to change a behavior when asked to do it out of kindness, out of love, to alleviate the anxiety of their loved one, when they're not being told they're being irresponsible. So they kind of do it for me. Could you humor me on this one? I would feel better. Again, not accompanied by there's something wrong with you. So those are the first four. I have a few more on the for all couples strategies for therapists. Next one, pretty obvious, is to encourage people to seek outside individual support during this time. If we can overburden each other, you know, with the expectation that the two people are going to provide all the emotional support for each other. So encouraging phone calls, social media, other sorts of contacts with people other than the spouse. Could be family members, could be friends. Take some of the pressure off the couple relationship. And in addition, though, the possibility of couple together interactions with others. And so I know couples, in fact, my wife and I just did this the other day. We did a Zoom appetizer cocktail half hour with some friends of ours. So they were in their kitchen, we were in our kitchen, and they we had a glass of wine, we had some hors d'oeuvres, and we chatted. And so couple to couple things. Two more. One is to encourage people to think about and talk together about the needs of others who are more vulnerable and reach out to them. So this is the couple acting as concerned people, as helpers for others in their lives, which then, of course, can make the couple themselves feel better about themselves and their situation. And then finally, on this first area, to kind of weave into your conversation this idea of couple resilience, banding together as a couple during a difficult time, and being, proud of what they are doing together as a couple, how they are functioning in their relationship, challenges they're avoiding, challenges they're solutions they're rising to, ways in which they're staying connected, this sort of couple resilience. Okay, so that's the first part for all couples. By the way, I probably should have said at the beginning, this background you see behind me is a virtual background, as you can probably tell because there's a little bit of fuzziness around my head. I'm not at the beach, I'm in St. Paul, Minnesota, but this virtual background in Zoom makes me feel better. Okay, second category, for couples who were already highly distressed. So these are couples that you're seeing, and they're not in the getting better phase of therapy. Okay, they're in trouble, and so lots of stuff going on with them, and then this pandemic hits. So I have 4 ideas there. The first is to help them see that they are not going to solve their problems during a crisis. A goal really is to not make the problems worse. So they're highly distressed anyway. They're very anxious now. Of course, it'd be great if they, came to some resolutions about their problems, but to lower the expectations, to think of it as a crisis period. And the goal is to stabilize, to not make things worse. It's kind of like you're, if you're dealing with an individual who is coming off, serious losses in their life, stabilizing, management, that's what you're trying to help them do. The time for sort of transformational breakthroughs, maybe later. So same for the couple, is to help them have realistic expectations about how they're going to solve problems that they've had for a number of years. The second is to use analogies to help them understand that they do have some control over whether they talk continuously about their relationship problems or whether they can put them on the shelf for a time. So here's an analogy. If they had a seriously ill child, chances are, and this is true for most couples, they would put their marital problems on the shelf for a period of time and then rally as co-parents for the child. They can always take the problems off the shelf later and look at them. So you can try to help them see that for now, given the stresses, given the anxiety that they are both facing, that the world is facing, that it's okay to put their long-term sexual problem, for example, on the shelf for now, do what they need to do to be kind to each other, get through this, and they can take it off the shelf later. And of course, part of that is, as many distressed couples are doing, people are trying to change each other, right? They're kind of on a, we will do better if you would only change this lifelong pattern. Encouraging people to hold the idea that neither of them are going to probably make major shifts in their personal, interpersonal functioning at a time like this, and to back off from trying to change each other. The third is that when older chronic problems flare up, you can use the externalizing strategy. You can say that it's these problems are flared up because of the virus, you had an old injury, and then you were, out in the cold, or you ended up hiking or something, and there was a flare up of the injury, to be able to understand that it flared up, not necessarily because it's back forever or it's going to kill you, but it flared up because of some circumstance. So in this case, uh, the flare up, you could urge people to see the flare up as coming from the virus and the situation we're in, as opposed to something strictly internal to the relationship. So externalizing the problem in that way. And then the fourth and final point for these highly distressed couples is to urge people not to draw any conclusions from what they're experiencing now about the state of their marriage, its future prospects. Don't try to draw lasting conclusions about your marriage, particularly negative conclusions, like we're never going to get over these problems. My spouse is hopeless. We are hopeless. Because given the anxiety and stress that we're all under, your judgment is likely to be impaired. So urging people to not draw definitive conclusions. They will have perspective, more perspective when this is over. It's kind of like I have a colleague who deals in what he calls closure therapy with couples who have decided to divorce. And he says himself, and he urges his colleagues to be very careful about making a personality disorder diagnosis of somebody going through a divorce, because they are in a more extreme state. Same thing here. It's to avoid the temptation to say, I knew it all along, this person will never be there for me. You can always look back with perspective. So those are the four things for couples who are already highly distressed. And then the last one is for couples on the brink. Here I want to just make some comments about the leaning out spouse and then the leaning in. So you're talking to a leaning out spouse during this time, and I've got some in my practice, discernment counseling practice right now. This may not be a good time to make a decision to divorce unless you are affirming a decision that you made before the crisis. Now, it's not that you're going to tell people they can't decide to divorce, but if they are in an acute state around the virus and an acute state in their marriage, it might be worth giving them permission, for a path one. If it seems like the current kind of general anxiety that they're experiencing is influencing their decision. In other words, you can urge people to not make a lifelong decision during a crisis if they can avoid it. And again, it's going to be up to them, and I'm not saying that path two should be ruled out for anybody now in this crisis. But if you feel that that what's happening situationally now is a strong part of their discernment for the leaning out one, you can kind of give them permission to slow down right now. Divorce, I like to say, is never an emergency decision. They can always decide later. Now, separation might be an emergency decision, of course, if somebody's at risk. But the divorce is a legal process that plays out over quite a period of time, and it's not an emergency. So that's one of the things to think about with leaning out spouses. And another is what I said before, if the leaning out spouse is drawing conclusions to support a path 2, divorce path, based on how their spouse is functioning during this crisis. Again, it can be worthwhile to urge them to not overgeneralize from what is really a pretty unique, is a unique situation in our history and in the life of their relationship. So to summarize, I want to be clear, I'm not suggesting that you try to bar the door to path 2, but offering a little wisdom, a little perspective on sorting out the situational versus the chronic aspects of their problems can be really useful at this time. And then for the leaning in spouse, this is not a good time, I would urge the leaning in spouse, to pursue your spouse to get closer to you. So it's not like, okay, this person's been leaning out and now I got them at home, 24/7. So if I'm coaching the leaning in spouse or partner, I would really encourage them not to go on the pursuit, not to be setting up romantic dinners and other things if they're getting a message from their leaning out partner, back off. I'm not into this. So the classic thing we do with leaning in, neither pursue nor distance. Try to find that sort of middle ground at a time like this. And I would also say to the leaning in partner to not expect a lot of emotional support right now. That if somebody is leaning out and maybe they feel like this crisis is keeping them from pursuing separation or divorce, if the leaning out one may be in a lot of emotional turmoil right now. And if you happen to be somebody who is perhaps needing a lot of personal support during this time, and you're leaning in with a leaning out spouse, I would urge them to get emotional support elsewhere and not overburden the relationship at this time. And if their spouse is, talking about divorce, bringing this up, during these at-home conversations, to not freak out and to say you hear them, you want things to work out, you're hoping for path 3, you're hoping that there's a way to resolve these problems, and to suggest that the divorce decision be on hold until after life returns to some sort of normalcy. And so for the leaning in, to use this time for some anxiety management in the relationship, very difficult to do, of course, to neither pursue nor distance, and to view the divorce conversation when it comes up as calmly as you can. I know this is something that you're thinking of doing. Here's where I am on it. And I'm hoping that it could be possible to delay something final here until we're past this crisis. So those are some thoughts for the leaning in, leaning out couples. If you're dealing with a couple for whom the situation itself, the pandemic and all that, it doesn't seem to be a major stressor, well, then what I suggested here may not be relevant. But for some, it probably is relevant. Okay, so those are some strategies and tips that I hope are useful to you. It's been helpful for me to kind of play these out. Your questions were very helpful in helping me generate some of these ideas. You probably have some on your own that I haven't talked about. One of the things I haven't talked about, for example, is what do we do with our own anxiety, and how much do we talk about how we're coping with couples? That might be an interesting thing for a Facebook conversation. So no, by no means exhaustive here, but I hope these ideas are useful. And again, there'll be one pager that outlines these. So I wish you well as you navigate this time yourself, as with the couples you work with, and for all of us in our country. And now I will find a way to